Okay, so now that we've run our Python script, we've got all of our objects named properly per the owl prep for Rhino video or owl prep for Blender video. We're ready to export. So let's just do a quick unit check. So we go into properties here and we go to our units, model units, and make sure I'm keeping mine in inches, and it's just because it's going to be embedded in the FBX file. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to export this object separately because it's a sub D object, and then I'm going to export everything else that is not a sub D on a separate form or a separate document. So let me go ahead and click on this one and go File, Export Selected, and make sure you put it in a proper place. I've got a folder here, and I've on my folder I've got owl FBX is where I'm going to put it, and you can see I've already done this. So I go to Motion Builder FBX here, and that's the owl FBX, but I'm going to delete it, and then I'm going to use owl background here. Okay, and then under options, I'm going to just make sure you have the exact same thing I have here. By default, I think exporting lights and views comes up, but we don't want to do that. We want to make sure map Rhino Z to FBXY is selected, and then hit OK. And then when you go to save, you should get another window here. And you can see this one doesn't have the detailed controls. If I click on preview, you can see there's a lot of information here. I can go to detailed controls, and then I can also do sub D meshing parameters for ray tracing. I can lower these down, kind of preview it. I can see if I take it all the way down here and preview it, I basically get almost the same amount of facets. So if I go up one more, let's preview it from there. Preview. Okay, and I think I'm fine with that. So I'm going to keep it like this, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. All right, and then I'm going to do the rest of it so I can actually hide that by deleting it. I'll bring it back. And then I'll select this whole thing and then go File, Export Selected. And I'm going to go owl. And just save the whole thing. And this one I'm going to actually bump up because I do not want to lose details. So if I look at my preview here, I want to make sure that I've got enough parameters. So let's go to simplified controls here, preview it. Okay. And it's fine. We'll clean it up when we get it into Blender anyway, but this looks good for right now. Hit OK. And file successfully saved. Meshing is complete. Okay, now let's go ahead and open up Blender. Yeah, this is right here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and click out of that scene screen there. And so if this is your first time using Blender, I just want to give you the quick lay of the land here. We've got our cube here, which is just kind of a tradition. We delete the cube. Just click on it and hit delete with the PC, or if you have a Mac, I believe you have to hit X and then click on delete. So if I go X, X, click on delete. Works that way too for a PC, but you can hit the delete button too. So with Blender, you're going to have a very similar layout to what you're going to have actually in the Unreal Engine, which is great because once you learn this one, it's going to be pretty similar. You've got your asset window up here. You've got your modifiers and your details about your scene right here, things you can modify. You've got your windows up here that you can actually change any of these to a different viewport style display depending on whether or not you're editing the image or UV mapping, texture, sculpting, all of that stuff. You can change the user interface here. Object mode is for selecting objects and moving them around as whole objects. So like if it's the owl beak, you could select the owl beak and then you can go into edit mode from there to edit it. But we don't have anything in the scene to edit, so you can't do that yet. Next up, we've got the different types of views are basically like for selection, similar to what you would have in any other program. Select. You can select objects in different ways. Add. You can add like a mesh. Say I wanted to add a monkey. You can add a monkey, right? Okay. And then all the way across here, we've got, you can add lights, cameras, all that stuff in here. Object, you can transform, clean up, all kinds of stuff there. Here is your selection, how things snap with the magnets, your soft selection, fall off kind of stuff there. Over here are your visual styles. So you can do overlays, you can select specific objects, you can control your navigation. This overlay here is for like adding wireframe or checking your face directions. Then over here you've got wireframe, solid, rendered, and high quality rendering with lighting. Down here, if you don't have a mouse, which go get a mouse, you can click on this and orbit around. You can click on this and zoom in and out. You can click on this and clicking and holding, of course, and pan around. This switches your view to the camera view and toggles back. Okay. And then to use the mouse, simply you zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. To orbit, it's different than Rhino. You click the center mouse wheel in and orbit around by dragging. And then you hold down Shift, click the center mouse wheel to pan around. You can also switch views up here. And then you've got over here, like I said, your scene where you've got your assets and stuff, which we have not put in yet. Down here is your timeline for animation, which we will not be doing because this is a 3D class, not a 4D class. So with that said, I like to actually just delete the camera and delete this light, because we're going to make our own later on and we don't need it. So let's go ahead and import file, import FBX, find your owl background, and all of the settings here should be fine. If I hit import FBX, you can see our object right here. And if I look at the overlay, or if I look at the wireframe here, you see it's very similar to what we've got in Rhino as far as the facets and stuff go. Nice quads. So the nice thing about using Rhino is that you're doing more industrial style design / architecture design. So you're controlling the sizes of things and you're actually, I think, creating things that are more realistic. Blender, I think of as more of an artsy kind of program where you're creating things that are a reasonable interpretation of, kind of like the difference between doing a still life drawing or doing an industrial design that can be fabricated, right? Okay, so looking at it here, I can also control how it looks. If I right click, I can, where is it? Yeah, sorry. So if you right click on the object, you can go to Shade Smooth and toggle it on and off. Shade Auto Smooth is good too. And if I hit Control 3, oh, sorry, the vertices are not touching properly. Let me just fix that, undo. Okay, so you can Control 3 to smooth an object to a certain subdivision level, but there's some issues with this form coming out of Rhino that we got to fix. So we're going to just start with this basic thing right here and fix it up a little bit, and then we'll bring in the rest of the owl in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about the geometry inside of here. If I look at this in wireframe here, you can see all of these different facets. If I switch over from object mode to edit mode, and you can do this by hitting tab as well. tab goes from object mode to edit mode. So if I look at this, every one of these faces where they meet up with one another has an extra bit of geometry. This is basically looked at as almost like an exploded out 3D object with every face just sitting next to each other. If we want to make it so all of the faces touch each other, and it's kind of easy to think about if I go Control 3 again, how it kind of smooths out all of the faces individually. So Control Z to bring that back, tab back over here. And if I wanted to now change and modify this so that all of the edges, instead of just being next to each other or connected, I can go up to Mesh here and clean up. So first I want to select everything by hitting A. So that selects the whole thing. And then if I go to Mesh, I go to Clean Up, and I go to Merge by Distance. This is going to get rid of any overlapping vertices. So basically, it's anything that's within 0.0001 meters from one another is going to be zeroed out and basically connected. So, and I always click on the sharp edges, keep the sharp edges the same. Okay. And it removed 329 vertices, basically. So all of the vertices that are meeting right there are now gone. Okay, and I can check that by now if I go to Control 3, it just smoothed it, see? Before, it was broken apart. Of course, now if we look at this, we've added some geometry to it as well. So now I've got a nice smooth object, okay? So if you bring over sub-Ds from Rhino, you might have to do that little process to smooth things out. But now it looks good. Okay, so tab back over to my object mode. So yeah, that's basically one of the ways of cleaning up your objects to make it look nice. Okay. So let's go ahead now and bring in the rest of the owl. And you probably want to do that same technique on every object you bring in because it makes it as if it was modeled in Blender. So this object is very much the same as what it would be like if you actually made it in Blender. Great. So it's now become kind of native. Oh, before we bring anything else in, I also want to kind of talk a little bit more about this real quick. Well, we've got something simplified here. So let's go over to our scene here and go to units. Now, by default, we're using the metric system, which we no longer want to do. So we're going to use imperial. And I'm going to switch from feet to inches. Okay. So that's going to control the way lights work and all kinds of stuff. Because if you're trying to light up something that is, you know, a mile in area, it's going to take more light. So you want to make sure that your units here in the program match the units you brought in from Rhino. So if you were using centimeters or the metric system in Rhino, it's fine to keep it the same. But I like to use imperial inches, especially since we're making a 5-inch tall little owl. It's a tiny thing, right? If you're doing something architectural, which we'll be doing in the future, you'll use feet for that. Okay, so let's go ahead, File, Import, FBX, go to our owl folder, and go to Owl, and Import. And there it is. Okay, so now when it imports, it's going to create these things over here, which are actually called empties. Okay, it's basically a grouping. So anything that has more than one will be kind of inside of here. So like owl talons, for example, right? There's, you know, a bunch of them. So it groups them all inside of a little folder for you. Okay, so that makes it nice for now, but we might want to join those together later on and make them all one object. But it keeps all of our UV maps and stuff clean, which we'll talk about in a bit. So yeah, that's kind of the geometry of things. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go through this owl, and I'm going to do the same thing I just did a second ago. But I also want to talk about isolating. So I've got the owl body here. I want to isolate it and make it the only thing I've got selected. So I'm going to hit Control-I or Command-I if you have a Mac. That inverts the selection after I had it selected. And then I hit H to hide it. So now I'm just working on this. Okay, but my zoom is a little funky, so I want to make sure that I'm focusing. Oh, where is it? On just that one thing. So if I click on it and hit the decimal point on my numpad, I then lock it in to the center of my universe here. But you can also do that by going to View and go to Frame Selected. And you can see the little quick key for it is the decimal point on the numpad, but most laptops don't have that. So the easiest way to do that is just go to View, Frame Selected. Frame Selected is kind of an underrated thing. Make sure you kind of are aware of Frame Selected. It will help you out. Okay, so let's go now to Edit Mode, tab over, go to our mesh here, go to Clean Up, and then go Merge by Distance. And you see 320 vertices are removed, sharp edges are maintained, and our object looks nice and clean. Okay, tab back over, having a look at it, looks good. So that's going to just make, again, our geometry work like it should. Okay, so we're going to do that for each one of them. I'm going to bring everything back. So I'm going to go Alt-H to bring everything back. Select the next thing. Okay. And I can even do it all at once, I believe. Let me just select the whole thing. Tab over A to make sure everything is selected. Go to Mesh. Go to Clean Up. Merge by Distance. Okay, and remove 7,369 vertices. Okay, tab back over. Cool. So that cleans everything up and makes it as if it was modeled in Blender. So we've got it all brought in, looking good, cleaned up now. The last thing I want to do in this part of the tutorial is add a light and a camera. So I'm going to hit Shift-A to add a light, and I'm going to do an area light. Okay. And then I'm going to hit Shift-A, and I'm going to add a camera. Okay. So the camera is right here, the area light's over here. I'm going to go ahead and move them. The way I'm going to do it is I'm actually going to click on the x-axis here, switch over to wireframe, and find my camera by zooming out. And then I'm going to grab that and move it. So I'm going to hit G to grab. And then with G, you can see I'm moving it all around here. Because I'm in this side view, it only moves left to right and up and down in space. So I can kind of put it right there. And then if I go to a top view by hitting the Z, I can see it right there. I can hit R for rotate, and it'll rotate. I can think about where I'm going to want it to look. G again. And I can also lock in the axis. So like say I'm in a different view here. So if I wanted to lock it into an x-axis, I hit X, and it only goes that way. Y-axis only goes that way. So I'll hit Y, move it that way. That's fine. Rotate around, and that's when it really comes in handy. So I go G. Oh no, it goes all over the place. But I can go X. Boom. G, X. Okay. And let's toggle into the camera. So if I hit that, now I can kind of see the way it looks. I can also lock in how I'm lining up the camera here by clicking on this. And it brings out this little breakout doohickey. And then I can go to View and go Camera to View. And that locks me in so that now when I control how I orbit through the space, I can set up my view just where I want it to be and get it kind of set up where you want the view to be. Okay. And that's good for camera stuff for right now. If I click the camera again, now I'm out of the camera. And let's find our light source. So our light, I believe is this one, right? And if I go G, I can grab it, and then Z, we'll lock it in on the Z axis, G, Y, move it that way, R, Y? No, Z, no, X, RX. So that locks in my rotation point from that X point there. And then with the light selected, I have this little toolbox here that I can click on. I can change the size of it. And I've got a 12-inch size right now. I can lower that down or up. I can make it, 6 inches. And maybe I want to make 2 of them, right? So I can do like almost like a light box kind of thing. So if I go ahead and go Shift D for duplicate, and then X locks it in on the X axis, boom. So now I've made 2 of them. And yeah, I'll go to a top view. Look at them here. I might want to go GX, kind of move them, line it up. And then just select this one, G, X, R. There we go. G, X, R. Okay, so those are like 2 soft boxes that are basically pointing at the object. And if I switch my visual style to this and go back in here and look at it, we can see where everything's kind of pointed. And then visual styles here, I mentioned to you wireframe. We've got just solid object. We've got rendering without lights. And then we've got rendering with lights. So you can kind of see the way the light's shining in here. Okay, so the last thing I want to do, I've got lighting, I've got everything set up here properly. I want to actually change the rendering style from our current rendering engine, which is called Eevee. So if I click over here on this little camera, you can see render engine here says Eevee. And under this rendering tab, that's what we're seeing is the Eevee form of rendering. And now if your computer has any problem using the next rendering engine, you can keep it on Eevee until it's time to final render, but you do need to do your final render using cycles. So this is cycles. If I click on it, it's going to change to a ray tracing style of rendering. It's much more accurate. And because this object is so small, the actual input of this light is quite demanding. So I can go back over to my lighting here and lower down the amount of wattage here. So if I change this to 5 watts, 3 watts, whatever. I don't know. Seems like still a lot, right? 3 watts, 3 watts. Okay, then it brings down some of the lighting, but everything is white, so it's Snow White in a snowstorm over here right now. Let's in the next video when we start going into materials, I think it'll dial in a little bit better. But so we've got our camera and everything set up here. If I click over here, you can see the way it's framed up. And I always like to do one other thing with this. When I've got the camera view on, I go to View, go to Cameras, and Frame Camera Bounds. So that way the whole window here is now that camera. All right, so that's cycles. And another thing to note with cycles. So I'll come up here, click on this. Under cycles, if you've got a designated graphics card for your computer, you do need to make sure that you've got it turned to the device that's being used. So if I switch this from CPU to GPU, it's going to run much better. And also, if you've got a slower computer, you can lower this down to 500 max samples, and then when you move around the space, it's going to render out a lot quicker. It's going to be less glitchy. So basically, that's how much detail it's rendering in the viewport. And down here, when you're doing the actual final rendering, which we'll get into much later, that's what this max samples is related to. So 500 is fine. You can see pretty good detail here. Okay, so that is it for this one. The next one, we're going to get into materials and doing a lot more with the actual mapping of things. It's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you very much. Hopefully this is helpful.